Hello and welcome to another easy conversation with Ian and I. We came up with this topic about 3-4 days ago, but neither of us are fully knowing exactly what we're going to say on this because there's so much. Well, for me, I love the phrase being proper selfish. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds so English and not good English all at the same time. But it's like so many different ways that selfish appears.
Well,
So
okay,
I'm,
so having never heard that expression being properly selfish, what would you interpret that to mean for you?
that I actually put myself first without any other consideration. And that's challenging to think when I really do that. That's what triggered in me when I heard that, when I heard the phrasing of that.
So, what I mean by it is yes, you're putting yourself first, but you're putting yourself first to support you so that you can support others. Because we often don't put ourselves first in situations. We put ourselves at the back of the bus. So we'll take care of the people who are in front of us, or like our kids, our family, or whatever. We'll put that stuff in front of our own needs. And then at the end of the day or week or whatever, you're pissed because you didn't get what you needed.
Yep.
Right? Like I'm let down that I didn't get what I needed out of this. So by putting yourself first, you can take care of yourself, nourish yourself, make sure that you're taken care of so that you can then show up for others in a bigger, better way.
Yeah. So there's a few things that have triggered off in everything you said there. I love this. So I was always the one that wanted to be at the back of the bus. It was the cool place to sit. But interestingly, it was because everyone else thought it was the cool place to be. It wasn't because that's actually where I wanted to be on the bus, except that I convinced myself that I would want to be at the back so I could watch everything and be the cool kid. I wonder whether that pattern needs a bit of a refresh.
A little bit, a little bit.
But also, like, as you know, I do daily self-care on steroids. Like, I'm doing a lot of stuff to do that. But it can become so routine that it doesn't feel like you're putting yourself first by doing self-care or doing that nourishment or choosing that thing, because it becomes a routine. And does it become less self-care when it's simply something you just do? Or is there need to be, because I forget sometimes that I do choose that every morning.
But I think in doing so, then you become a more balanced person. So it's like your pendulum never gets too far out of whack, right? So if you're always giving because that's what you were taught, like I grew up in a family that gave first. So when you give, then you teach your kids your pattern of you give, and then you ignore your needs. So I try as best as possible to give to myself first. And some people see that as being selfish, but I see it as being properly selfish because I am taking care of my needs. Now I'm teaching my kids that they need to take care of themselves first, because you can't necessarily rely on everybody else to take care of you.
No, and we all know the idea that we have to fill our cup first before we can fill others or we can give to others. Like, that's a concept that makes common sense. But I still, when I heard that phrase, I was like, but when I really get down into the detail, do I always put myself first, even in those situations? And I don't always. I often will, particularly when it comes to family, immediate family, I will always tend to put them first
Yeah.
before I think of me. And like you said, then after a period of time, it's like, well, that's a bit annoying because now I don't get what I need
Yeah.
as a result of putting them first. But there's also this, it feels like sometimes that's what is needed more than.
I don't think it's wrong necessarily to put yourself second from time to time. It's knowing when you've gone too far. So I often talk about, and I'm sure I've mentioned it in some variation with us when we've been talking about following your compass being what feels good, what doesn't feel good. So if you start feeling like I'm not feeling okay right now, it's probably because you've dipped into the other side too often and you've given too much of yourself. So, I mean, we hosted my family, my parents this last week or so.
Because it's been Thanksgiving, hasn't it?
Yes, Thanksgiving here in Canada. And I love my family dearly. But sometimes, and I think it's maybe just habitual, right? Like it's almost like as soon as you're back in that house or they're in your house, then it goes back to the olden times, right? Like this is what I learned. So I would give more of myself. And even when I got the offers to, oh, I can do dishes or I can help make dinner, I'm like, no, go sit down. Yet I think I knew instinctually that I needed more me time. And if I just accepted a little bit of help, I wouldn't have been as tired at the end of the day, or maybe some of that aggravation that I took on, which was totally my decision to do. I just didn't realize it until I had maybe hit a wall and I wanted to pass out at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, and it often comes retrospectively, completely. The other thing I hear in this is often when I'm talking with clients, they'll often talk about boundaries and how they need to be able to say no more often because they seem to always say yes. Now, it's interesting because I come from an opposite perspective. I tend to say no before I'll say yes, so I hesitate before I agree to anything. And that has its pitfalls. But I do find that there are a bunch of people out there who will just say yes automatically to anything that they're asked for. And it can be really difficult to not only decide on a boundary of where we say, actually, and it's interesting because it's not always about the yes or the no. And I love what your example, if you'd said yes to help, it would have given you more, which would have allowed you to recharge maybe.
Exactly.
And, but it's like, well, is the boundary I can do it all, or is the boundary I accept help? Whatever the boundary is that we define, the yes and the no, it's not always about saying yes to others or saying no to others or putting others first. It's actually just knowing when there's a time for a yes and when there's a time for a no. It's not as black and white as, oh, we just have to say no to everything or we have to say yes to everything. And I always find this conversation challenging with, well, not challenging, but it's a common conversation because my clients are often saying, I want to put in boundaries and want to say no. It's like, you don't always have to say no.
I had a client recently who was having trouble with this very thing, taking on clients when he knew he wanted his schedule to be lighter. And it's something like he felt like an obligation that he had to say yes. So what we worked on was creating a buffer. So they had more time to think between saying, so he wasn't on the spot to say yes or no in the moment, but he had a buffer so he could contemplate, okay, if I say yes, this is what's going to happen. If I say no, this is what's going to happen. Or maybe there's a way I can say yes, but it's not an immediate taking up of my time. And that was sufficient. That time to take and time to reflect, because his habitual nature was to say yes. So it's knowing which habitual nature gets you in more trouble. And sometimes you have to go through that trouble to realize, oh, I shouldn't do that all the time. I need to say no more often, or at least need to evaluate how I'm going to deal with this by getting
yes, or what the little micro boundaries are if you do say yes.
Yeah.
which is your habitual yes, but have some more, clarity around what you're really saying yes to. Because I
Right.
think that can be the sticking point, is the yes can feel so broad. So then there's a whole lot of yeses that happen in that one word
Yeah,
without
I
even
actually,
realizing it.
in a coaching workshop that I've done in the past, we talked about requests and promises. And when and like as a subservient person to a boss, you feel like you always have to say yes. But if you could say yes, but with an opportunity to renegotiate some of the other things that are already on my plate, then it makes sense, right? So people say that I can say no to my boss, but then in real life, when they say, hey, yeah, I need you to do something, like, sure, I can do that, but what are we going to renegotiate of these things? And what are you okay with falling off the schedule a little bit while I figure this out?
Yeah, because the yes will create more and more and more, and that's when the overwhelm hits. And often, so in the last week and a half, I came down with a head cold, which forced me to stop a little more. But what was interesting was that my calendar had cleared, so I didn't feel that sense of overwhelm, because what I was taking on last week was more rest. I had to say yes to rest
Mm-hmm.
and putting my feet up and not picking up that phone. Well, not for work related. I might have played on my phone a bit. But I didn't have that sense of overwhelm because my calendar had actually automatically been a little clearer. So I didn't get that sense of overwhelm. So even though I had a head cold, and that's usually when people go, oh my God, everything's hit me and now I've got all this stuff and I don't know what I can do because I'm feeling unwell and I can't show up where I said I could. I didn't experience that complete sense of overwhelm, because the schedule had already cleared automatically before I took on the yes to rest. And what was funny was actually I got to the end of the week and more bookings started coming in for this week. And I was like, oh, well, even though I'm not feeling 100% yet, apparently I will be by Monday next week because my schedule has now filled.
Well, you give yourself permission to take some time for you, right? And I think that's part of that self-care piece, is knowing when you need to take care of you. The people I worry about are the habitual ones who never do that. Yeah. And then they have these breakdowns more often than not.
And the breakdowns are long as well. They're usually drawn out and often involve trauma in some way, whether it's physical or emotional or relationship related, or there's some form of trauma that comes with it.
Yeah, the kind of like the whole burnout syndrome.
Yeah. Yeah.
They push too far too long, and then it's a crash. I used to have that happen to me in my old work life, because everything revolved around a fiscal calendar and everything had to happen before year end. And when year end would hit, like, work would be crazy, and then I would be sick every year the 2 to 3 days after that year end was over.
Right. Well, that's like predictable.
Called performance health. Like, you perform until a point and then you crash and burn because you have to get to that date, and then it's okay to be sick.
Yeah, I mean, how often do we hear people go on holidays and get ill because they've finally given themselves time to stop?
Or retirement. Oh, I've been waiting for retirement, and then they get sick or...
Yes. Yeah, some other things happen, that's right. In my previous life to my current business and way that I choose and all those choices that I make currently, so actually it was probably only a couple of years before I started the business, I would fill every spare minute of the day. So I deliberately chosen, so at the time my daughter was in primary school and I'd chosen to be able to do the drop off and the pickup, which meant I needed part-time work. And so I had part-time work. I had 20 hours a week, so I could do leave work at 9:30 and get to work at 9:30 and leave at 2:30. So I had that window. And as soon as I moved from full-time work to part-time work, I then filled the rest of those hours into the evening with volunteering at the school, doing fundraising, being part of the PNC, which is called, the Parents and Citizens. I'm sure it's called something different around the world, but, the committees that get stuff done at school, in everyone's language. I'm sure they exist everywhere around the world.
Yeah.
And I would fill every spare moment and when I looked back on like why I did that, for me, and I'm not sure, I haven't done a full analysis of what the purpose behind everyone doing that sort of behavior. But for me, I didn't want to pay attention to myself. So I filled those gaps, what I thought were gaps that would maybe make me take a look at myself, and just busied myself with all these other things. I remember getting the full documentation, because I was in quality management before I had my business. And so I took all the documents for what they ran as their yearly carnival, and I redid all the documents because that really needed to be done. And it was like, when I look back on it, what an insane thing to do. I'd just chosen to go part-time, and I probably was working more hours than when I was full-time. And so there was this bit of a reality check that had to kick in when the business started, because I couldn't do the business as well as part-time, as well as volunteering for the school staff.
Yeah.
Because that was my overload. And so I did find a breaking point where I had to pull the pin on something.
So what made you start? Because what this is kind of inciting in me, at least in this conversation, is you need to schedule time for you to take care of yourself. But I'm curious to know what the trigger was for you to start doing some of the you work, because that's what you were avoiding.
Totally. And I avoided it still even after the business. So for me, it had to be a bit more of a transition. So I pulled the pin on the and focused on the business, which was actually, well, let's be real. The first couple of years of business is still voluntary work, really. Like, you do a lot of work for not a lot of money.
That's true.
So I was still volunteering in a lot of ways. Sure, there was trade-off eventually, and there was, it's always worth volunteering.
You were planting seeds. Let's give it some value. You were planting some seeds.
Well, yes, but I still, in the activity that I was doing, it was still felt in that same, was just doing a lot of things, doing a lot of busyness. But it was slightly shifting because I was focusing on others that were more directly impacting me, rather than volunteering for the school, which sure helped the school kids, but that didn't impact my everyday life. Okay. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then there was this slow realization, because I'm never the one that will jump from one type of behavior into another one immediately. It just is not in my experience. So there was this slow transition into, right, well, if I'm taking time out to work on the business, and then when I worked with a marketing coach, inevitably I had to do some personal work to get the work done with the marketing coach.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I got this forced experience of the benefit of taking care of myself. But in reality, 5 years into the business is when I started doing daily work for me. And I'd known logically, it's the way I'd learnt for 15 years prior to that daily work was possible. I had the tools. I could do it. It would take me 3 minutes. It wasn't hard, but it still took me that length of time to choose it for myself.
Yeah, you have to be ready for any kind of change like that. You have to be the one who decides. You can't be told what to do. It's like your mother telling you to clean your room. Yeah, I don't want to clean my room, but when I want to clean my room, I'm cleaning my room. Like, and it's gonna be clean. But don't tell me when to do it.
And I think this when we're told that we need to be selfish, it can be a longer transition to get to looking at that self-care and being prioritizing ourselves, because we've had years of patterns that don't actually support it.
It's the conditioning, and the guilt of not giving to somebody before yourself. But I don't want my kids to think that they have to take care of somebody else before they take care of themselves. So they'll watch me in the morning, like make my breakfast first. I start my stuff and then I help them with theirs. I always start with me.
Yeah.
Mine takes longer too, but I want them to know that it's okay to take care of yourself.
Yeah. And what great role modeling. I mean, we don't realize how effective that, and I think the other thing I kind of get a bit passionate about here is that we can do something like that and still fall short in other areas by not choosing us first, but simply by doing just one act like that every day starts to change the pattern. It gives a really good role modeling, even if you're not always doing it constantly in more high pressured circumstances, because that habitual choice does start to make a difference. So we can start small, and I'm not saying you only do that, because I know you do a lot of other things to take care of you first, but I think it's a really great example where if someone's trying to make that transition, it can be as simple as that.
It doesn't have to be a big thing to change. I think it's also important that you share that you're like when you screw things up or when you go overboard in one direction or the other, so that they know it's okay to be making that mistake. The idea is that you start to learn where's your tipping point, so that and what do I need to do before I get to that place so that I can take care of myself and I don't end up going into that darker place or the burnout place or whatever that overloading or overwhelm that happens after that.
Yeah, and I think the other side of this is that being selfish and always putting ourselves first also has its pitfalls. Because if we constantly do us and not considering others, then that becomes a problem, because we're just not able to do the sympathy or the empathy or the consideration. And that becomes a bit of a problem as well. So it's finding that balance between both.
There's always there's two sides to a coin, right? And it's never going to be rolling straight down the center. It's going to be on one side or the other, but it's trying to find that balance for yourself. So that, and you'll know when you've given so much to yourself and you're ignoring everybody else, because they're all going to be pissed. So
pretty much.
Right, because our relationships are two-way street. They're not one-sided. So we need to make sure we're taking care of them. But I think more often than not, we will give of ourselves first, than take care of ourselves. So maybe the balance isn't 50-50. Maybe it's a lot less than that. But if you're taking care of yourself first, then you have the ability to give more.
Yes, and I do find throughout a month, I particularly as a female, I have different times in the month that I can't give as much as I could the week before.
You're different? You've got things going on?
I do. It's funny, that female body, bloody bugger of a thing. But it's like just allowing ourselves to not feel like, and I get it, females seem to have the, yay, we get the cycle going on. So yay, we get the you know, we've got that. But I see males go through cycles as well. And it's this, you know, the beat up that can occur because we're not showing up today like we did yesterday or last week. We've got to just go, well, maybe today's a rest day. Maybe today is a little bit, take the foot off the pedal and allow for an extra half an hour of enjoying that coffee, or getting to bed a little earlier because your body's just a little more tired. And giving ourselves permission to do those things when we feel it.
Yeah. And I think it's important that we include our partners in those conversations so that they know where we're at as well. And that's happened for sure where because we alternate who puts down my son each night. And sometimes I'm just bagged and I'll go to her and I say, I need you to do them tonight. I need to go to sleep. I'm so exhausted. And we'll make a trade. So being able to have that dynamic with one another, that it's okay that we're not always 100%.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key, isn't it? That communication. But we have to communicate with ourselves first.
Yeah, you need to know what you want
need.
And to be able to ask for it.
Yeah, which goes back to your original story of knowing what you're willing to ask for and not just defaulting into the original old school pattern of
just grin and bear it, take it, just do what you got to do, and that's what we do, and whatever the other garbage stuff that we've learned through our lives from our environment and our families or whatever it is.
Whatever that sort of old stuff is that kind of just hangs around. Yeah.
And we have to let go of some of those old ways of seeing things, but until we start to challenge them and have the conversations, we won't make any changes in the areas that we need to.
No, and I think so yes, I'm very much an advocate for we have to communicate with ourselves, but sometimes to start that conversation with ourselves, we have to have it with others. And our partners are a really good place to start that. There may be some other assistance that you need to kind of get fully articulated and clear and get that clarity. But it's that funny thing. You got to have the communication with someone else outside of you to help you get clarity within, then have those conversations with yourself so that you can be much better, again, to have that communication with those closest to you. So there's this constant.
And to do that, you need time for yourself.
You do.
And you can't avoid by reading books and watching reality shows and whatever it is that you do to avoid, or volunteer for everything at the school. Yeah, you've got to be able to make sure that that was the other thing I wrote down as you were talking, is your schedule got filled up, right? You got to schedule yourself. You have to schedule yourself, otherwise that time will get scheduled for you.
So one of the things that I implemented 3 years ago. So again, I've been doing this for 12 years now, and technically I've been doing this energetic work for 22 years. So, you know, only 3 years ago did I, every 6 weeks, I now schedule time out. It literally, that's the event name in my calendar. And there's
give yourself a timeout?
I give myself a timeout. There's little slots, maybe every second or third day, that gets added into my schedule just randomly across my calendar. Sometimes it's at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Monday. Sometimes it's 5 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. Just all random. And I stick to those. So that's something that I practically do, because I am a bit of a scheduler, and I do like I like the look of having activity.
A full schedule.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that I do these days.
So schedule yourselves, everybody.
Yeah,
Put
do
in some
that.
Random you time.
Be proper selfish.
Yeah, be properly selfish.